welcome to Turn the Page, the official podcast of the Syosset Public Library.
Welcome to Syosset Libraries podcast. This is Jessica. I will be your host today, and I am here with an author who wrote a book that is beautiful. First of all, this book is physically gorgeous and just gorgeously written. And when I first got it, I was like, oh my God, it's so long, but it didn't feel that way. I just sort of drank in all the language and all the characters and the lore, and I loved it. So please introduce yourself and tell us about this book.
Firstly, thank you so much for having me here, Jessica. It's such a pleasure to get a chance to have this conversation with you, especially after your fire drill just got over. So I think that was a good start.
Just a little background here. I had this interview scheduled with Gourav about like 26 minutes ago, and as soon as I got into the Zoom meeting, we had a fire drill. So please, like, wherever you're listening to this, please just like let's give Gaurav a round of applause for being so patient and understanding.
No, been there and done that, so in the corporate setup, I completely get it. But again, thank you so much for having me here. My name is Gourav Mohanty and I'm based in India. I daylight as a lawyer and kind of my bio says I gaslight as an author. So that's something fun which I write on my Bumble bio as well. But Sons of Darkness is basically a dark reimagination of an ancient Indian epic poem called the Mahabharata. So if you imagine the Troy series, the Odyssey and the Iliad, and you combine that, 11 times into it is the size of the Mahabharata, which is the longest epic poem in the world. And it's also something which Indians consider holy. So I wanted to pick up a story from there and give it this grimdark twist and bring it to the world fantasy stage. Because right now the entire fantasy arena is having a sort of renaissance when it comes to recognizing fantasy from other parts of the world apart from just the Europe feudal fields. So with R.F. Kuang's Poppy War doing it for the Chinese mythology, I'm hoping that Sons of Darkness opens the door to South Asian fantasy as well. I mean, at least that's the hope. But thank you so much. I'm glad you enjoyed the book. I know it's long. In fact, when I was trying to publish the book, that was the first difficulty I encountered, trying to convince them that word count is a good thing.
I agree wholeheartedly. And like I said, I hope that didn't sound like anything that would forbid any of the listeners to check the book out, because you really should. I think my point really was not so much that this book is long. I'm sorry if you heard me banging on my table there just there. My point really is that yes, word count is a good thing, especially for something that is so well and gorgeously written. And it didn't feel like a long book when you were reading it. Like, there was not a point where I was like, oh my God, I don't want to spend any more time with these characters. I don't want to see what happens next. I don't want to find out what's happening here. It was just sort of a really nice experience of just immersing yourself in this world. And then when it was over, you had that whole moment of, okay, so what's next? What's going to happen next? So yes, some people might look at a thick spine or a very long word count done well, and that could be a joy, and it was. So thank you.
And thank you so much. I mean, I completely agree. I think word count is immaterial. Even a short book can feel really long if it's not what you want to read. And similarly, a long book, you can devour it within like 2-3 days, right? But I think that's what the idea of Sons of Darkness was. It's a book which I want people to marinate in. Because where I come from in India, the epic fantasy genre is something which is completely dormant. People have not taken a chance on something big. When it comes to epic fantasy, you take your Robert Jordan, you take your George R. R. Martin. You have your average, I don't know, we're still on the topic of word count, but it's like almost 200,000 words, 284,000 words. So I think the idea when you create an epic fantasy world is you slowly trap people in, like it's like a quicksand. And before you realize that it's completely engulfed you. Because I realized that a lot of Western readers, when they started reading out Sons of Darkness, the name was something which is very new to them. You have two kingdoms which sound very similar, Mathura and Magad. And it creates. I read in a bit of review that it took some time for them, but enough repetition going through the chapters. It's like it was home for them after a point of time. And I think that is something which I really enjoyed listening to readers as to how places which are in India, which still exist in India, felt have become now familiar to them. I think that was something which I felt was a patriotic victory point for me, at least.
So one thing I do want to ask you, I have something in the notes, sort of that I did want to ask, because, and you brought it up yourself, is the idea of grimdark. So I know what grimdark is from my perspective, but it's something I've been hearing more of, and I'm not sure if listeners really know grimdark. So in your view, how would you describe something, a world or a book that is grimdark?
I think the shortest description I can give of Grimdark is by calling it anti-Tolkien. I think that's like the most succinct summary of this entire genre. It basically is a reflection of a world which is kind of nihilistic and pervasively bleak, where it's just filled with anti-heroes. And I think it kind of reflects the reality because no villain ever thinks that they're a villain in their own story, right? The line between good and evil is something which only the victors draw. It's only what history decides. When they're doing it, no one ever thinks that. And I think Grimdark is a reflection of this duality of good and evil in every person. I think that's the description I would like to give the whole genre of Grimdark. And I think that's what also I wanted to do with mythology. Because when it comes to myths, especially Indian myths which are still worshipped, you have a very strict Gandhian demarcation between good and evil. And I wanted to merge that and mess around with it. So I think that's the seed from which Sons of Darkness came.
Yeah, and I think that that's also sort of just solidified. It's sort of solidified in the prologue when Muchuk, is it?
Yeah.
Is
Yeah.
yeah, is sort of for, he says, for a hero, for a hero of light, he reckons he cast a rather grim shadow. Hero, the word slithered nastily in his mind, an honor bestowed upon you when you had killed all those who would have called you a mass murderer, which is such a good, really, like, that particular line, I have to say, was like the claw that just grabbed me in, because it is true, when you hear about all of these stories, when they say, what is it, history or whatever, it's like it's written by the victors, like, of course, like, yeah, so he's very well aware that the term is interchangeable. It just depends on who is on what side of the weapon.
Oh, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. I think whenever writers are writing, and I mean, I have very limited experience, but it's a reflection of the world they find themselves in. And given the world realities that exist today, especially with the rise of fascist forces all over again, it was something which was always in my mind, that idea that because of the mass appeal of these leaders that we have, everyone's calling them the hero, but when you I have a feeling that once we reach the future, they will look at them as villains, right? And so that's something which kind of, I think, stepped and seeped into my writing as well, when it especially came to crafting Muchukun. I think that's something which is very important, because even the main POV characters of Sons of Darkness are all characters which were traditionally evil in the original epic. So I'm trying to like write from their perspective, from the perspective of the so-called vanquished rather than the victors.
So there are a lot of characters in this book, and you did a extremely good job of giving them, I mean, they all had their own voice, like their voices were very distinct, and that is impressive. How did you do that? How, like, was there something, like a certain way that you wrote where, when you were in one character's head versus another, you sort of kept them separate? Did you write in like different notebooks when you were writing different notebooks?
Right.
I'm being very archaic here. Did you open another tab for a different character?
I think it kind of went something very similar, that you open different tabs in your mind. But I read this line about when, like, my younger brother is into acting, and one of his dancing classes coaches told him that whenever you're stepping into a character, you have to step into the shoes and completely immerse yourself in that character's physiology. And maybe I did not do it to that extent in terms of physicality. But whenever I was writing a particular character, I just used to picture that as if I am that person with those person's qualities, and especially the negative qualities, and how would they respond to a situation. It was easy because I feel that every person, every human being has multiple facets of personality within them. Like there are split personalities in all of us. Sometimes we are moody, sometimes we are not. So when it came to Krishna, I tried to imagine myself that, okay, how would I respond to this situation if I'm being wicked and slightly Dumbledore? How would I address the situation? Similarly, when it comes to Karna, who was this low-born archer who's fighting the caste system, I tried to imagine that I wish I was that honorable, like a Jon Snow of sorts, and how would he respond to a certain situation. So alternating between these character viewpoints actually was quite refreshing for me because it kind of allowed me to live different lives through them and while torturing them in the process because obviously it's Grimdark. So I think that was very refreshing. It was just about stepping into the shoes and trying to imagine that, okay, what would a person like this respond?
So how long did this book take you to write? And considering how this is like your side, like would you consider writing like a side career or a hobby? I mean, how do you do all the things that you do? Because I read somewhere, are you a comedian as well?
Yeah, I'm a stand-up comic as well.
Wow.
Uh, Thank you, thank you. I really appreciate it. So the first book took me a lot of time to write because I was balancing it out with a law firm job, and writing was completely a hobby and escape from the black and white world of a law firm. I don't know if you have watched Suits on Netflix, but it's our life is exactly like that, long hours and dealing with white collar crime and stuff. So this was an escape where I could play Thanos and click my thumb and just reimagine a universe. Uh, Over 4 years, I realized, oh, hang on a second, I've written the last chapter and the book is all complete and before me. And now I have to find a publisher. But because of the success of Sons of Darkness, which I did not see coming at all, suddenly law has taken a back step. I think one of the interviews which I was doing, someone told me that, okay, 1 second, law was your mistress, spouse earlier, and now law has become a mistress and writing has become your spouse. So I think it's something like that. So writing is now my main hustle. Law is something which I don't decide. Amongst all of them, it's always like a tricky thing, but I think that's what keeps life interesting to like not juggle it, not multitask so much as juggle it. Give them separate times in the day.
No, definitely. And that's, I mean, like really, first of all, so there is going to be more. I believe I had read that this was going to be a trilogy.
Yeah. Yeah, this is a trilogy, and I'm already like 99% through the second installment, Dance of Shadows. Okay, so which I was writing for the last 2 years. I'm definitely faster than George R. R. Martin. That's all I can assure you guys. So Dance of Shadows again delves a lot deeper into the Indian psyche. Because obviously with the first book, the difficulty always is to establish the world. Once you're done with that, your second and third book becomes a lot easier to just bring out the character work and really dive deep into them because the world becomes a living thing of its own, which plays on the side. So I realized that I have a lot of space to now deal with the characters and explore the physiology of villains, especially. So that's something which I'm having a lot of fun with. So yeah, and the map is going to grow wider. Sons of Darkness doesn't end up in a cliffhanger, but there's a lot of room for it to grow into a second book. So that's where I'm just heading with a lot more violence and a lot more twists and a lot more. It has a heist in it. That's something which I had such a blast writing. And I think again, I really feel that what we watch or what we read influences our writing a lot. And I think when I watched Money Heists, I think the idea got planted in my head that okay, I need to do something similar in a fantasy setting. So yeah, that's nice.
I also want to talk a little bit about, first of all, the artwork. Again, like I mentioned, it is a physically gorgeous book, and there's some really cool things in it, including some artwork. There's the map. There's some artwork in the beginning, but I also like I mean, obviously, if you're reading it on an e-reader, it might be a little different. I read the physical book. But there's these intersections where the page colors are a little different too. And that's something I don't think I've ever seen done before. Was that something you had suggested?
So that was always written in italics because it was the narrator's voice, something which is going on like in a parallel dimension to kind of cover what was happening in the book. So this is something which I'll credit Bloomsbury and Head of Zeus with. But when it comes to the cover and the map is something which I drew on a software which is called Incarnate. This was before the book even got signed on. And I had a blast doing it. So if anyone's listening to this and wants to draw maps, Incarnate is a great free website to like play around with this. And I researched a lot on ancient Indian maps, comparing them and building this. So if you're actually looking at the map of Sons of Darkness, it is corresponding to the map of ancient India from historical sources. So that's something which is fun. Obviously, it looks a little fantasy with the old touch and everything. But even when it comes to the cover was something which the publisher did not engage because I got the cover done before I even got a publisher. Because this whole old adage that you don't judge a book by its cover no longer holds true, right? Because there are so many wonderful books out there. I think a good cover is a window to the content inside in a lot of ways. So luckily, this was designed by Michaela Alcaino, who just won the UK Book Designer of the Year award. And it's just the stars aligned and that she was freelancing at that point of time. And I reached out to her saying that, hi, can you do this? And can I get some pandemic discount? And she got on board and we really brainstormed and she was so supportive in coming up with this gorgeous design that kind of helped put the book on so many shelves. So, yeah.
I mean, do you just like look at it and geek out over it? Because it's not even my book, and I was looking at it and geeking out over how cool it was.
I know, I completely agree, especially because the way bookstagrammers and book bloggers have taken pictures of the book, it's something which blows my mind because I know it's my book and I can't be that narcissistic. But when I see it, I'm like, wow, okay, this is something, a work of beauty. I know it's mine, but I'm admiring it as a third person. It looks brilliant. For sure.
So,
even broken binding edition, I know you can't see it. I mean, it's not going to be a video thing, but I love the splayed edges of this book and, just the whole, wolf and everything. It's just, I think, it's just gorgeous work.
Wait a second, is that a special edition of it?
Right, so Sons of Darkness has 2 special editions. There's one by Barnes & Noble in the US, which is, again, gorgeous. That's something which I don't have. In UK, you have and the rest of the world, you have the broken binding edition, which has splayed edges. It's a limited signed copy. So
Whoa.
it has...
mine is not even as pretty as... I mean, mine is beautiful. But I have to say, because obviously, when you're in the US, you don't have much choice. But if you like this book, you should and you want to own it. The one that Gaurav is showing me is even more beautiful than the one that I have, which is the finished copy that is in the bookstores in the US. Whoa! Oh my gosh!
and first time I saw it, I unraveled it. I took out the ribbon. I was like, okay, this is an Elvish treasure. Something from Rivendell and Lord of the Rings. I mean, this is too gorgeous. It occupies a place of honor on my shelf. And again, not just because it's my book, because it looks so damn pretty.
So, I guess really quickly, I mentioned before, there are so many characters. Were there characters that you really wanted to spend more time with, or were there characters that you didn't expect to enjoy writing as much and they just kind of kept popping back into your head? Like, and how much of that was informed by sort of like the rhythm and just the way that the poem, the source material went?
Right. So the characters which I had a lot of fun writing, which I was really interested in, were the female characters. Because what happens is, see, now it is something which we have to accept that the past, the ancient world, especially the texts from there, they came from a patriarchal society, So it's very male heavy, male view heavy. The women were all damsels in distress. So I want to change that narrative to damsels who cause distress. So when you take the character of Satyabhama or the swordswoman or Mati, that unhinged pirate princess, all of these characters are my characters. They did not really exist in the original mythology. And I wanted to bring that because, see, it's fantasy. And I read somewhere that Samantha Shannon, who has written The Priory of the Orange Tree, yeah, I love her. And
oh my God, I love her too. I've loved her since the Bone season.
She's
so
not Bone season, but Priory of the Orange Tree was brilliant. And in one of her interviews, she said that she wanted to do something other than what George R. R. Martin is doing. Because since it's fantasy, why does it have to be a world where women are, in a place where patriarchy is heavy? And then, I mean, it's great to look at women overcome that, but in fantasy, why not try something different? So I picked up that idea, and in Sons of Darkness, again, there are these kingdoms where men and women are completely equal. And I really enjoyed that, to reimagine ancient India in this what if scenario where patriarchy did not exist, or where they were unhinged pirate princesses. So that's something which I really had a lot of fun with. In terms of a surprise character who I did not expect that I will have so much fun writing was Shishupal, because he's more a passive character, but he's a retired soldier who just wants to relax and have nothing to do with the drama of civilization. But he keeps getting pushed into situations where Murphy's Law is so heavy on him. So I by the end I realized that okay, I think this is the lawyer in me writing, because we're so tired, like we just don't want any more cases. And I think that kind of came into like every person who's having like a work crisis is reflected in Shishupal. So that was something that I had a lot of fun with.
That's really relatable too, I have to say, and when you were talking before about, you watch a heist movie and it gets in your mind, it reminds me almost of like, I'm trying to think like those cop movies from, like the 80s where like the cops like, I'm getting too damn old for this. I have one more week till I retire. I just want to be on a beach with my family. And it's always that character that's the best character. So I totally love that.
Thank you. Because obviously they look passive as if they're not doing much. But it's from their eyes they're looking at the world, but then they're so relatable because it's fun to read about these worlds, but if you're in them, you might not be enjoying it so much. So I think Shishupal kind of gives you that idea that okay, I know you're very excited by this exotic Indian world, but trust me, you don't want to be because it's so messed up. So I think that's something which I really enjoy.
So does the next book have a title?
Dance of Shadows.
Excellent. I am so excited. Is it coming? Do you expect it to come out this time next year, or do we have a little time?
I really hope it does come out this year because the deadline for submission of the manuscript is February 23rd. So I think just around Valentine's Day is when I'll be submitting the manuscript and getting to have a good time. So after that, it's all about the editing process. I don't know how long that takes, but hopefully, fingers crossed. But it's almost done. I'm just proofreading it one more time.
Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for being so understanding about the impromptu fire drill. That just yes, it was basically saying like this book is fire. Grab it off the shelf.
I'm going to take it up with good omen, and plus I think mishaps like this make interviews so much more memorable because I don't think you are going to forget the one on either of mine that the one with the fire drill, like
yes,
an episode
sure.
from Friends.
Well, thank you so much. This was Jessica with Syosset Library's Turn the Page podcast. Our guest today was
Gourav Mohanty. Thank you so much for having me, Jessica, and cheers, everyone.
And we are going to close this chapter of Turn the Page.
It's time to close this chapter of Turn the Page. Join us for the next episode.